Elder Scrolls Oblivion is a first and third person single player RPG adventure now finally remastered after the original release nearly 20 years ago. It's now running at 4K at 60 frames per second, available on Xbox, PC and PS5. The graphics are not all that's changed though, as the character creator has also received a massive tune-up. You're given a lot of choice to make the character you want to create, but the choices can be daunting, with skills, attributes, races, origins, birth signs and classes to consider. Skyrim did its best to streamline this process, whereas Oblivion embraces the RPG. The latter of which I prefer, and I'm sure you will too. So what do you need to know before you make your character and jump into this beautiful remastered experience? What has changed? This video will break it all down, so be sure to follow the timestamps below for specifics. Before we start, just quickly, thanks to Bethesda for sponsoring this video, and if you want to pick this game up for yourself, follow the link below. Just like in Skyrim, your journey begins as a prisoner. Here you'll customize your looks and choose your race. The remaster noticeably updated the character models. The core RPG mechanics are still present, and you'll notice this immediately when you choose your race, as races provide unique points of difference. They have different attributes and skill contributions, as well as different passive and active bonuses. Even though you choose your race before picking your birth sign and classes, let's save your racial choice until after I explain the finer details, as you'll understand more about what you're choosing. Both your race and its origin affect your attributes. As you can see, if you press the button to open your stats, the baseline of 40 can either be lowered, highlighted in red, or raised, highlighted in green. Races also start with different skill bonuses. This isn't affected by their origin like the attributes are. Once you pick your race, you'll also pick a birth sign and a class. This modifies your attributes and skills yet again. Finally, when you level up, you'll be increasing your attributes instead of putting a point into a skill and then raising your health, stamina or magicka like you do in Skyrim. Attributes in Oblivion indirectly affect these instead, except your stamina is called fatigue in this game. So let's go through what attributes are and what they do. You have strength, intelligence, willpower, agility, speed, endurance, personality and luck. Strength influences the amount of damage a character deals with longswords, claymores, maces, war axes, battle axes, warhammers, and your bare hands, how much fatigue you have, and how much you can carry. It also affects the skills blunt, blade, and hand to hand. Intelligence influences your total magicka, and it also affects the skills Conjuration, Mysticism, and Alchemy. Willpower influences your magical resistances, fatigue, and magicka regeneration. It also affects the skills Alteration, Destruction, and Restoration. Agility influences your chance at being staggered, your fatigue, and your damage with daggers and short swords and bows, which has changed from the original. It also affects the skills Marksman, Security, and Sneak. Speed influences how fast you move and the length of your jumps. Yes, this affects the speed of your sneaking too. It influences the skills Acrobatics, Athletics, and Light Armor. Endurance influences your fatigue and health. It also affects how much your health increases when you sleep and gain levels. So most combat classes will want a large amount of this attribute early to get as much health as possible, as to not find yourself with low survivability late game. It also affects the skills Block, Armor, and Heavy Armor. Personality influences how persuasive you are in conversation, as well as the prices at shops. It influences the skills Mercantile, Speechcraft, and Illusion. Luck is an interesting attribute as it plays a small part in all skills, yet it doesn't have a skill of its own and doesn't receive a multiplier when you gain a level. Luck plays a part in the chances of contracting a disease, affecting your betting in the arena, as the team you bet on will have higher health when you have higher luck. Luck will also occasionally stop traps from activating. At 50 luck, all your skills will receive no bonus. Any less than 50 and you start getting negative bonuses. More than 50 and you'll get positive ones. An example is at 10 luck, you'll have minus 16 to all skills. At 100 luck, you'll have plus 20 to all skills. With that, you now understand what attributes you'll want for a particular build, but you'll also need to understand what skills are. This is going to be a big section, so feel free to use the timestamps below. Skills can be increased to a maximum of 100 points, with an exception of Athletics and Acrobatics. Each skill has a rank from Novice to Master. Each rank gives you access to more powerful spells or a perk. Novice is 0 to 24, Apprentice is 25 to 49, Journeyman is 50 to 74, Expert is 75 to 99, and Master is at 100. The first skill is Armorer, and it affects your ability to maintain weapons and armor at maximum efficiency. Broken weapons and armor are less effective. At Novice, you cannot repair magic items. At Apprentice, you can now repair magic items. At Journeyman, your repair hammers last twice as long. At Expert, you can repair items beyond their maximum durability. Improved weapons deal more damage, and improved armors protect more. At Master, your repair hammers never break. One hammer lasts a lifetime. Athletics affects how quickly you run, swim, and sprint. At Novice, your fatigue regenerates more slowly when running. At Apprentice, your fatigue regenerates at a normal rate when running. At Journeyman, sprinting consumes slightly less fatigue. At Expert, sprinting consumes a lot less fatigue. And at Master, sprinting no longer consumes fatigue. Then we have Heavy Armor, which affects your ability to use heavy armors more effectively. At Novice, heavy armor you wear degrades much faster. At Apprentice, heavy armor you wear degrades at a normal rate. At Journeyman, heavy armor you wear degrades much more slowly. At Expert, heavy armor you wear no longer encumbers you as much. And at Master, heavy armor you wear no longer encumbers you at all. Then we have Conjuration, and it affects the ability to summon creatures, weapons, armor, and turn the undead. All the different ranks influence what level spells you can cast of the Conjuration variety. It's the same with Destruction Magic, which affects your ability to cast spells to inflict elemental damage and weaken your opponents. Then we have Mercantile, which affects your ability to get better deals when buying or selling goods. At Novice, the value of items you sell is reduced if the item is of poor condition. At Apprentice, the value of items you sell is no longer reduced if the item is in poor condition. Merchants may also offer better items. This has changed from the original, or has at least been updated. At Journeyman, you can buy or sell any item to any vendor. Merchants may also offer even better items. Expert, all merchants have more gold available. You can invest in a shop to permanently increase that merchant's available gold. And at Master, you always buy and sell items at the best possible price. Merchants offer the best items they have. Then we have Security, which affects your abilities to use lockpicks to open locked doors or containers. Do note, this just makes it easier. At Novice, up to 4 tumblers will fall when you fail and break a lockpick. At Apprentice, up to 3 will fall. Journeyman, up to 2 will fall. Expert, only 1 will fall. And at Master, no tumblers will fall when you fail and break a lockpick. Then we have Blade, which affects how much damage you deal with blade weapons. At Novice, you have no particular perk. At Apprentice, your power attacks deal more damage and blade weapons are more durable. This is new to the remaster. At Journeyman, your power attacks apply weakness to normal weapon to your opponent. At Expert, your regular attacks will have a slight chance to make your opponents bleed, dealing damage over time. This is also new. At Master, the weakness to normal weapon applied by your power attacks is even stronger. This is also new. Then we have Block, which affects how much damage you mitigate when blocking an attack. At Novice, your shield or weapon loses durability when you block an attack. At Apprentice, your shield or weapon no longer loses durability when you block an attack. At Journeyman, blocking an attack consumes slightly less fatigue. At Expert, blocking an attack consumes even less fatigue, and you can perform a shield bash while blocking with a shield. At Master, blocking an attack consumes almost no fatigue, and your shield bash deals much more damage. These are new skills to the remaster. Then we have Blunt, which affects how much damage you deal with blunt weapons. At Novice, you have no particular perk. At Apprentice, your power attacks deal more damage and blunt weapons are more durable. Journeyman, your power attacks temporarily grant you shield. This is new to the remaster as well. Expert, your regular attacks have a slight chance to silence your opponents. This is also new. And at Master, the shield granted by your power attacks is even stronger. So blunt weapons are more distinguished from blade, unlike what they used to be. Then we have Hand to Hand. It affects how much damage you deal with your bare hands. At Novice, your attacks additionally deal fatigue damage. You do not recoil armed opponents when blocking their attacks, but at Apprentice, your power attacks deal more damage and you recoil armed opponents when blocking. Journeyman, your power attacks have a chance to disarm your opponents. Your attacks can hit creatures immune to physical damage. Expert, your attacks deal more fatigue damage, and at Master, your attacks deal even more fatigue damage. so hand to hand might be a skill worthy of picking up now. Alchemy affects your ability to create potions and obtain greater benefits from ingredients. At Novice, you recognize only the first property of ingredients. At Apprentice, you recognize the first 2 properties of ingredients and have a chance to craft an additional potion. At Journeyman, you recognize the first 3 properties of ingredients and can handle more simultaneous potion effects. Expert, you recognize all 4 properties of an ingredient and can always craft an additional potion, but at Master, you can make potions from a single ingredient and can handle even more simultaneous potion effects. Alteration affects your ability to cast spells to breathe or walk on water, open locks, reduce encumbrance, and shield yourself from physical and magical damage, and all the ranks just let you cast a different level of alteration spells. Same with Illusion, which affects your ability to cast spells to charm, conceal, create light, silence, paralyze, command, and affect aggression. Same with Mysticism, which affects your ability to cast spells to absorb magic, reflect damage, dispel move objects, sense life, reveal paths, and bind souls. Same with Restoration, which affects your ability to cast spells to restore, fortify, and absorb attributes, cure diseases, and improve resistances. Then we have Acrobatics, which affects your ability to jump higher and withstand falls. At Novice, you have no particular perk. At Apprentice, you can dodge while moving. Journeyman lets you consume less fatigue while jumping. Expert lets you jump over the surface of the water, which used to be the Master rank, but now the Master rank is you take much less damage when falling long distances, and jumping consumes a lot less fatigue. Then we have Light Armor, which affects your ability to use light armors more effectively. Novice, light armor you wear degrades much faster. At Apprentice, light armor you wear degrades at a normal rate. Journeyman, light armor you wear degrades much more slowly. Expert, light armor you wear no longer encumbers you at all. Then at Master, while wearing exclusively light armor, your protection is greatly increased. Then we have Marksman, it affects how much damage you deal with bows. At Novice, you consume fatigue while drawing a bow. At Apprentice, you no longer consume fatigue when drawing a bow. At Journeyman, you can focus your vision while aiming and holding down your block button, which lets you essentially zoom in. At Expert, your arrows now have a slight chance to paralyze the target on hit, and at Master, your arrows have a great chance to paralyze the target on hit. Then we have Sneak, it affects your ability to move unseen and unheard by observers, and your odds of getting away with pickpocketing. At Novice, hitting enemies while undetected deals extra damage, particularly with daggers, which is ×4, and bows, which is ×2. At Apprentice, your sneak attacks are a lot deadlier, which is ×6 for daggers and ×3 for bows. Journeyman, you make less noise when moving while sneaking. Expert, you are harder to detect in bright environments. And at Master, your sneak attacks ignore the opponent's armor. Then we finally have Speechcraft, which affects your ability to persuade listeners to like and trust you. At Novice, you have no particular perk. At Apprentice, disposition decreases more slowly over time when trying to persuade a character. Journeyman, you can rotate once for free when trying to persuade a character. At Expert, bribes cost much less. And at Master, disposition no longer decreases over time when trying to persuade a character. Disposition is also less impacted by the most disliked action. So those are all your skills. After making your character, you'll be soon asked to choose a birth sign. There are 13 birth signs and they all provide different bonuses, some giving you passives and some giving you new active abilities. How you want to play will give you a good starting point here. The Thief being great for sneaky assassinations and the Lady being good for destruction magic users. Let's go through them all now. The first birth sign is the Warrior. They get an increase of endurance and strength by 10 points, so it's fairly straightforward. This is just good for any build. Then we have the Mage. They get an increase of 50 points of magicka with no downside, so if you plan on being a spellcaster, this is a decent choice. Then we have the Thief, which gets an increase of agility, luck, and speed by 10 points, so if you are going a sneaky assassin build, this can be fairly useful. Then we have the Steed, which gets a movement speed bonus of 20 points. It's actually quite substantial. So if you want to move around quicker, get through the game quicker, get to locations quicker, or in combat, move around more nimbly and dodge attacks, this is definitely a burst sign for you. Then we have the Apprentice, which increases magicka by 100 points, which is 50 more than the Mage, but you do get a 100% susceptibility to magic, which is quite the downside. So unless you have ways to fortify your health, I wouldn't be picking the Apprentice. Then we have the Shadow, which gets Moon Shadow as a greater power, which grants invisibility for 60 seconds to be used once a day. Now this is full invisibility, you don't have to invest into stealth, so it is very useful, especially for characters that aren't investing in being sneaky, as this will let them get around. Then we have the Ritual, which has Blessed Word, forces the undead to flee in horror for 30 seconds, can be used multiple times a day at a cost of 40 magicka points per cast, so they can always counter the undead in some way or another. And they have the greater power, Mara's Gift, which lets them restore 200 points of health once per day. This is good for anyone role-playing a paladin. Then we have the riskiest of them all, the Atronach. Those born under this sign cannot regenerate magicka, but have the ability to absorb any magic cast at them, so they have an increase of 150 points of magicka, but a 50% chance of absorbing spells cast at them. But the downside is stunted magicka. Magicka regeneration is completely halted, so you might just want to pump intelligence and completely forget about wisdom with this particular burst sign, though it is one of the harder ones to make work. Then we have the Tower. They can open locks of average difficulty once per day, and can reflect 5% of all incoming damage for 2 minutes once a day. If you can remember to use your powers, the Tower is definitely useful. Then we have the Lord, which increases your armor rating by 15, which is physical damage, and increases your magic resistance by 15%, which is obviously any magic damage, so overall you're quite a bit tankier. This is also useful for any build. Then we have the Lady, which fortifies your willpower by 10 points and your endurance by 10 points. I like choosing this burst sign for a destruction magic build because you like having a little bit extra health and you like fortifying your willpower, which affects destruction magic. Then we have the Lover, which can paralyze targets with Lover's Kiss, greater power. They are paralyzed for 10 seconds and reduces the caster's fatigue by 120 points. So you can take out a target once per day to make the fight generally much easier to manage. This plus the Nord's greater power means that early game is going to be very easy to handle crowds. Then we have the Serpent that comes with the greater power Serpent spell. It deals 3 points of damage for 20 seconds. It also cures poison, dispels 90 points and damage fatigue 100 points to the caster. Can be used once a day, so this is very risk reward. It does a lot of damage early on, but I wouldn't recommend going this unless you want to role play as a poisonous assassin of some kind. So those are all the burst signs, and they all have distinct roles, which I'll leave you to choose for yourself. Now, as you're building your character, your class will determine what skills are primary and what skills are secondary. There are some pre-built classes, but you can also make and name your own, which I would recommend since you know your way around after this video. You start by choosing a specialization: magic, stealth, or combat. The skills we've gone through fit within one of those buckets and will all level faster if selected. You'll then select 2 governing attributes and your character will start with +5 in those attributes. Last, you'll select 7 unique skills. These will all be major skills and will level up faster for your character than the others. So if you want a sneaky archer, you'll definitely pick Marksman and Sneak as a baseline, and maybe Acrobatics, Athletics, Light Armor, Security, and Armorer. But circling back, before all of that, you need to pick your race. The reason I've pushed race out so far is because without an understanding of attributes and skills, your race choice won't make sense unless you're picking purely for role-playing purposes, in which case, that is completely valid. So let's run through everything each race provides. Argonians have 75% disease resistance, but they also have a 100% poison resistance, which is a full immunity. They also have a passive that lets them breathe underwater. Their attributes though are very different when comparing origins. As an Argonian, you get 50 in both agility and speed, whereas Thorn Martians are better spellcasters with 50 intelligence and 10 more willpower. They have +15 in athletics and security, and +10 in blade, hand-to-hand, alchemy, illusion, and mysticism. So as an Argonian, you're leaning towards a sneaky assassin or archer, and as a Thorn Martian, more towards spellcasting. A low starting endurance might make you hesitate to pick Argonians if you want to melee. Bretons are next, and they have 50 more magicka to start with, as well as a natural 50% resistance to magic. They also have the Dragon Skin Greater Power, which gives them a 50% shield that lasts 60 seconds. This can only be used once a day. Naturally, this leans Bretons towards becoming spellcasters. They also start with 50 intelligence and willpower, further leaning into this, with the High Rock origin having less strength and more speed than the other. They get plus 10 to Alchemy, Alteration and Illusion skills, and plus 15 to Conjuration, Mysticism and Restoration skills. So if you're looking to cast spells, and especially if you want to summon things to do your bidding, Bretons are your race. Dark Elves have a Greater Power which summons an Ancestral Ghost once per day. It casts melee and ranged frost spells, but I wouldn't count on it tanking for you late game. It is though a nifty distraction and a bit of extra DPS all throughout your journey. Dark Elves also have a 75% resistance to fire, so this means that Dark Elves don't really lean one way or another. Any build appreciates the Guardian and fire resistance. Their attributes say the same thing, more or less flat across the board, with their highest being speed and lowest being willpower. Surprisingly, because I thought they would like destruction magic. Also, endurance or personality is low depending on your origin. Their skills paint a different picture. Plus 15 to blades and destruction, with plus 10 to athletics, blunt, light armor, marksman and mysticism. So the Dark Elves can go a number of ways, from sneaky melee to archery to destruction, or a mix of all three. High Elves start with a huge 100 points of magicka, leaning them towards any build that casts spells. They also have a 75% resistance to disease. You might be thinking, wow, 100 points of magicka sounds high, and you'd be right, which is why they have flaws too. A 25% weakness to fire, frost and shock damage. So as a High Elf, you're hoping that when you come across enemy spellcasters, you're able to take them to school and outspell them. Their attributes are what you'd expect, high intelligence and low strength. Somerset Isle origin getting a low endurance and the other getting low speed, both of which are painful attributes to lose early. They get plus 15 to Alteration, Destruction and Mysticism, and plus 10 to Alchemy, Conjuration and Illusion. So if you're not 100% leaning into casting spells, do not pick this race. Imperials get 2 once per day greater powers, but no passives. I tend to forget to use my greater powers, or I tend to forever save them for the next big thing, so if you're like me, Imperials won't be for you. The first power is Star of the West, which touches your opponent to absorb 100 points of stamina, effectively crippling them and allowing you to keep swinging. They also have Voice of the Emperor, which lets you charm a target for 30 seconds with 30 points of charm. They also have the highest starting personality, but low agility and speed. They also start with plus 15 to Mercantile and Speechcraft, which means that yes, if you want to roleplay Prince or Princess Charming, this is probably the race for you. They also get plus 15 to Heavy Armor and plus 10 to Blade, Blunt and Hand to Hand, so along with their ability to drain stamina, they can be effective in melee as well. Khajiit are next, and they're the only race that can use a lesser power, Night Eye, that lasts 30 seconds. It lets you see in the dark, it uses magicka instead of having a once per day restriction. They also have the greater power, Eye of Fear. This lets them fear a target up to level 25 for 30 seconds once per day. It's a power I mostly use when running away, as targets can be snapped out of the effect when damaged. They have 50 starting agility and are fairly well rounded. They get plus 15 to Acrobatics, being cat-like and all, as well as plus 15 to hand, once again, cat. They also get plus 10 to Athletics, Blade, Light Armor, Security and Sneak. So yet another sneaky assassin skill focus, but it can be taken a number of ways depending on how you want to play. Nords have a greater power called Nordic Frost, which touches a target for 50 points of damage and can be used once a day. This means that Nords have one of the easier times early game, as once per day you can get rid of a bothersome target, rest and do it again, especially if you haven't invested heavily in combat. They also have another greater power called Woad. This is a 30% shield that lasts 60 seconds and can be used once a day. Passively, they have a 50% resistance to frost damage. All this together means that Nords have a much easier time thriving in the early to mid game, so are perfect if you plan on not investing heavily in combat skills early on. This is further supplemented by the fact they start with 50 strength. They won't make good spellcasters, having 30 in both intelligence and willpower. Well, if you're Western origin that is, Eastern are a little bit more willful. They also have high endurance. So yes, naturally you'll lean towards a tanky melee specialization, though having high health growth and carry weight might just make a naturally great starting point for any build. So let's consider their skills. Plus 15 in blade, blunt and heavy armor, plus 10 in armor, block and restoration. So yes, you're pushed in the melee direction, maybe even a splash of paladin, but like I mentioned, you can go any direction with them and feel just fine. Orcs have the Berserk greater power. It grants them a huge 200 more points of stamina, 20 more points of health and 50 more points of strength for 60 seconds once per day, but the downside is your agility will be reduced by 100 points while it's active. Orcs also passively have 25% resistance to magic. Now with this much strength and stamina, you'll easily be dropping enemies with power attacks, so as you'd expect, orcs suit a melee focus. I don't blame you if you don't see a reason to pick orc unless you can use stamina and strength, but hang on, they have 45 starting strength with 50 endurance. Surprisingly though, the Stronghold Origin has high willpower as well, making them great with destruction magic. Their skills have a lot of plus 15s in armor, block, blunt and heavy armor, with plus 10 in only hand to hand. Now you can lean into that with a full heavy hammer style melee build, or hammer and destruction magic, as heavy armor doesn't really impact destruction magic like it does some others. Though like the Nords, starting with high strength and endurance means they can really slot into any class build. Redguards have a greater power called Adrenaline Rush. For 60 seconds it boosts their agility, speed, strength and endurance by 50 points, as well as their health by 25 points. This can be used once a day. It's a good thing I ran through attributes because now you know that 50 extra points is essentially doubling your stats early on. So for 60 seconds, you become insanely strong. I can't overstate how good this is if you need to take out key targets, get through some hard areas, or simply run away. So like the Nord, Redguards have an easier time in the early to mid game. They also have a passive 75% resistance to poison and disease, which isn't as flashy, but it's helpful. Attribute wise, they're similar to the Nords, having high strength and endurance and low intelligence and willpower. What I said about the Nord and the Orcs still holds up here. These are great attributes to start the game with, so don't feel bad about picking this race if you want to transition into a spellcaster. Skill wise, they have plus 15 in athletics, blade and blunt, with plus 10 in heavy armor, light armor and mercantile. Wood Elves come with the greater power Beast Tongue, which lets them command a creature up to level 5 for 60 seconds once per day. In the greater community, this is not considered to be good. Level 5 isn't that high, so yes, you'll have a slightly easier time in some niche situations, but overall it's not that great. They have a 75% resistance to disease and have the highest agility and speed starting attributes. They also start with plus 15 to Alchemy, Marksman and Sneak, with plus 10 in Acrobatics, Alteration and light armor. So yes, they almost perfectly suit a sneaky archer, which, let's face it, is expected of the Wood Elves, though you can use them as an assassin of any kind. So after you pick your race, you can customize your looks. You then go through a short tutorial, get your birth sign, and then pick your class. Now you know everything you need to know to build your perfect starting character. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to tell the algorithm and let me know below what you're building. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks to Bethesda for sponsoring this video. Until next time, ciao friends.